Ah, hello, dear friends. Today I'd like to do a little exercise where I explore the plots of popular films, movies, and attempt to distill them down into 5 sentences. And I want to do this because I'm very interested in looking at the structure of stories and understanding how similar they are despite seeming very different on the surface. So for example, if I were to say Star Wars A New Hope is essentially the same story as The Lion King, which is essentially the same story as The Fast and the Furious, which is essentially the same story as Coach Carter, which is essentially the same story as The Lord of the Rings, you'd probably think, no, you're making it up. But there are very interesting parallels. So let's have a little exploration. I'll think of movies. I haven't planned this. I'm just going to think of movies as they come to my head to try and make it as organic as possible. So let's start with, let's say Star Wars A New Hope. So we have sentence 1, Luke Skywalker finds a droid with a message as I've tried to hit the key points there. I'm sure many people will agree that there is a lot more detail in the story. I may have missed out a number of elements there. But let's have a look at another story. What can we think of that may be very different to Star Wars: A New Hope? Obviously that's sci-fi. So let's have a think. How about we go for, let's say, Toy Story, the original Toy Story. It's quite different to Star Wars, isn't it? So we have Woody and friends gather around a walkie-talkie to hear what their owner is getting for their birthday. And they discover his main gift is a Buzz Lightyear action figure. A shiny, popular toy. Woody is threatened by Buzz. Pushes him out a window. And in turn is pushed out by the other toys for Buzz and Woody have to make it back. To Andy before they move house. And are captured by the sadistic Sid next door. Working together, they make it back to Andy, having become friends along the way. Okay, I think that sums up Toy Story. Let me put that over there. Let's go for a rule of three, shall we? One more. What could be very far removed from Star Wars and Toy Story? How about Titanic? I don't think I'll be spoiling the end of Titanic for anybody, as we know what happens, of course. Okay, one. Jack wins wealthy young woman. Jack prevents Rose from going overboard, and a romance blooms. Titanic hits an iceberg and sinks, causing Jack to pass away, leaving Rose behind. Rose lives a fulfilling life before passing away at old age and returning to the Titanic in the afterlife, which is a little harsh on her family that she would have spent the majority of her life with. But that is romance for you. So we have 3 different stories there. Very different, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, I would argue that they're all the same. And you may think, why? English gentlemen, Star Wars is not Titanic, and Titanic is not Toy Story, obviously. But what I'm referring to here is the work of Joseph Campbell, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. I believe this was published in the US first in the late 40s, just before the turn of the 50s. And, well, to read the blurb on the back, despite their infinite variety of incident, setting and costume, the myths of the world offer only a limited number of responses to the riddle of life. In this fascinating and influential book, Joseph Campbell presents the composite hero Apollo, the frog king of the fairy tale, Rutan, the Buddha, and numerous other protagonists of folklore and religion, enact simultaneously the various phases of their common story. The relationship of their timeless symbols to those discovered in dream by contemporary depth psychology is taken as a starting point for interpretation. The psychological view is then compared with the words of such spiritual leaders as Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Lao Tzu, and the older man of the Australian tribes. From behind 1,000 faces, the single hero looks out, archetype of all human myth. So, of course, it's an extensive book, you can see, but essentially, at the core of it is the idea that despite there being millions of stories out there, if they are led by a protagonist, the hero, in inverted commas, then essentially they always follow the same structure. And I suppose you could argue that stories play such an integral role to our everyday lives that it's essential that we know that we're hearing a story. We can recognize a story when we're being told it. As soon as you could understand language, and even before you could understand language, of course, as a child, your morality, what was right and wrong, what you should do in certain situations and not, were informed by storytelling. Fairy tales, nursery rhymes, fables, religious texts tell endless stories, of course, and whether or not we should burn things, not burn things, how to cook, where to go, what to do, even how we relate to each other. Meeting a friend and telling them about your day is never told up through a pure data-led itinerary. Woke up at 8:30 a.m. rise due to lack of power to alarm clock system. Shower had no water of adequate warmth. You know, we're not a series of algorithms and robots. We find ways of bringing this data to life in the form of stories. You'll never believe what happened to me. I woke up this morning and the alarm hadn't gone off, so I was already super stressed. I got into the shower and it was so cold it made me jump out of my skin. So we're telling stories to each other to help each other relate and understand one another, so it makes sense that there is a consistent structure, so that I know I'm being told a story and I can follow it easily. It's a little bit like a pop song. We find pleasure in clarity and the ability to predict and know things. So if a pop song falls into a tight 3-minute structure, intro, verse, verse, bridge, chorus, outro, whatever, we find pleasure and engagement through the recognition of these familiar patterns. Now, the hero's journey itself, if you were to Google image search the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, you'll see some very complex models with myriad multiple touch points of reference, but you can distill it down into 5 very simple beats, so to speak. So, 1, you have hearing the call. Hearing the call. What makes this something the hero should do? They should go on a journey. But that isn't enough, because step 2 is to crossing the threshold. The threshold. Essentially, what makes this something the hero in the story should do now? They are forced to engage with this journey now. They can't return. 3 is finding allies and demons who will help along the way and who will get in the way of progress. We then have the ordeal. The ordeal, a challenge or a test of the hero. And once they have passed through the challenge and the test, there is usually a transformation. The transformation. How has the hero changed? So, we have the hero's journey. Now, if you think about these titles alone, you may start to recognize patterns in the sentences that I wrote. So, hearing the call, Jack wins a ticket on the Titanic in a betting game and boards 3rd class. 2, crossing the threshold, the ship sets sail, and Jack catches the eye of Rose, a wealthy young woman. 3, finding allies and demons, Jack prevents Rose from going overboard and a romance blooms. 4, the ordeal, Titanic hits an iceberg and sinks, causing Jack to pass away, leaving Rose behind. 5, the transformation, Rose lives a fulfilling life before passing away at old age and returning to the Titanic in the afterlife. It sounds pretty accurate to those titles, right? Let's test them against Toy Story. 1, hearing the call. Woody and friends gather around a walkie-talkie to hear what their owner is getting for their birthday. 2, crossing the threshold. They discover his main gift is a Buzz Lightyear action figure, a shiny popular toy. 3, finding allies and demons. Woody is threatened by Buzz, pushes him out of a window, and in turn is pushed out by the other toys. 4, the ordeal. Buzz and Woody have to make it back to Andy before they move house, but are captured by the sadistic Sid next door. 5, the transformation. Working together, they make it back to Andy, having become friends along the way. I think some very obvious links there. And then Star Wars: A New Hope. Hearing the call, Luke Skywalker finds a droid with a message from a Princess Leia asking Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is our only hope. Asking for Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's our only hope. 2, crossing the threshold, he searches for Ben Kenobi and learns about his heritage, but can't return home because it has been destroyed by the Empire. 3, finding allies and demons, he joins Kenobi and meets Han Solo and Chewbacca, who agree to fly them to Alderaan to find Leia, but can't, as it has been destroyed by the Death Star superweapon. 4, the ordeal, Luke joins the Rebel Alliance in a battle to destroy the Death Star before it destroys the Alliance base. 5, the transformation, Luke channels the Force and destroys the Death Star, returning a hero. Pretty freaky, huh? So you can hear, by distilling the story down into 5 main beats, of course there is a lot more individual detail throughout, but I'm sure you agree that that is the main thrust of the story. Each of these stories are incredibly similar. The hero is following a journey, and we want to go on that journey because we understand how it begins, endures, and ends, and by understanding that, we are ready to receive and enjoy the detail. Interestingly enough, the reason why I started with Star Wars: A New Hope is that George Lucas was reportedly such a subscriber to the work of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey that A New Hope follows the cycle, the in-depth cycle, virtually verbatim. I believe it's often used in film schools to articulate how the hero's journey comes to life on camera. But then if you think about movies or films that you perhaps haven't enjoyed in your life, it may be that it simply does not comply with the hero's journey. It's structurally missing beats or changes things, and you don't necessarily like that. If you think about certain films with controversial endings, they're quite often controversial because they don't provide closure. If I think about the ending to Inception, for example, mild spoiler alert, you don't know, based on that spinning top, whether or not the character is awake or not, and as a result you are robbed of the transformation of the hero's journey. Some people may greatly enjoy that ambiguity, some may not. There are certain Oscar award season bait films that are long-form character studies that some people may not enjoy, sometimes because the ordeal may be relatively low-key or an internal struggle that isn't easy to identify with some people. So they may be come away from films with the opinion of what was the point in that, or nothing happened, it was boring. So if you start thinking about the comments or the opinions that people have on films and stories they don't enjoy, you can start to recognize their incompatibility with the hero's journey. What was the point in that? The characters were boring. It took ages to get started. Nothing happened in the end. You know, you can relate all of these opinion points to the journey quite well, I believe. Now, obviously this is a very brief ASMR whispered video, so I was never going to go into complex detail about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey and the hero with 1,000 faces. And of course you have other great bodies of work as well, like the 7 basic plots, which explore other types of plot, like comedy, tragedy, etc., where we see some deviation from this as well. But I hope you have enjoyed this little exploration of storytelling, and perhaps can apply the concepts to your own form of storytelling in the future. But until then, thank you for joining me.